It's been not fun for a while, not to victimize myself. There are plenty of white women doing that on social media right now as it relates to Israel-Palestine. But this is a very difficult period of covering news. I am heartened, though, by the fact that there are a lot of people beginning to open their eyes up to not just what Israel's doing right now to Gaza and to Palestinians, but it's giving people an opening to look at the broader history that led us to this point, which is one of the modern human rights atrocities, and certainly one of the worst ones that we funded in my lifetime.
I think it's an educational moment for the world. It's a shame it comes at such a price of blood, but I think, obviously we hear a lot of like terrorism and things like that, but we're also hearing concepts like settlements, occupation getting defined, I think, in people's minds in a clearer way than has been before. Yes, absolutely.
And one of the kind of moments where you're seeing the brick by brick building up of resistance to the war crimes that Israel is committing by every definition of the word, they are committing war crimes. Is you're seeing a formal response here by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He spoke yesterday about what is happening in Gaza. And he speaks here about the broader context that we have been trying to emphasize on this program. Israel reacted to this speech with indignation and
they're trying to get this guy fired.
Yeah, right. And it's amazing that is their reaction. You just see how fraught this is and how far gone the leadership is there in Israel, because nothing he says here is controversial in any way. But it's really important that we have voices that are prominent on the national stage articulating things like this. So here, without further ado, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
The situation in the Middle East is growing more dire by the hour. The war in Gaza is raging and risks spiraling throughout the region. Divisions are splintering societies, tensions threaten to boil over. At a crucial moment like this, it is vital to be clear on principles, starting with the fundamental principle of respecting and protecting civilians. I have condemned unequivocally the horrifying and unprecedented 7 October acts of terror by Hamas in Israel. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring, and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets. All hostages must be treated humanely and released immediately and without conditions. And I respectfully note the presence among us of members of their families. Excellencies, it is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced, and their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Excellencies, even war has rules. We must demand that all parties uphold and respect their obligations under international humanitarian law, take constant care in the conduct of military operations to spare civilians, and respect and protect hospitals, and respect the inviolability of UN facilities, which today are sheltering more than 600,000 Palestinians. The relentless bombardment of Gaza by Israeli forces, the level of civilian casualties, and the wholesale destruction of neighborhoods continue to mount and are deeply alarming. I mourn and honor dozens of UN colleagues working for UNRWA. Sadly, at least 35 and counting, killed in the bombardment of Gaza over the last 2 weeks. I owe to their families my condemnation of these and many other similar killings. The protection of civilians.
That's a good chunk of it. I think people get the picture there. But that is everything that we've been saying on this program, said very clearly by somebody in a position of authority. The United Nations has condemned the settlements and the violations of the law of the borders drawn by international arbiters, and have deemed Israel for decades at this point to be in violation of international law on that front, putting aside the atrocities committed recently. It is a yearly thing when you see how many more Palestinian civilians are killed by Israel versus Israeli ones. The Iron Dome, the military technology that Israel possesses, it's not even comparable to what Palestinians have, one of the poorest areas in the world, and most highly concentrated, deprived populations in the world. And when he says there that hopes for a political solution have been kind of evading the grasp of the Palestinians, and the fact that they feel that it's slipping away as time goes on, that's absolutely accurate. I mean, we mentioned this on the show the other day, but in 2018 and 2019, there were nonviolent marches and protests by people in Gaza. It was called the Great March of Return. And during that peaceful demonstration, Israeli snipers killed 180 or so people, just for protesting in that way. When you have a situation where elections have not been held since 2006, only 7% of the population, by calculations, voted for Hamas, and half the population now are children. There's no democracy for Gaza. It's like, think about that. There's this branding of democracy that is assigned to Israel as they control 2.4 million people who have no democracy. So what is a democracy if you are imposing anti-democracy 3 miles away from you? That does not mean you're a democracy. Democracy is not just for thee. It is supposedly a value that you're supposed to engender. And Israel is the opposite of a democracy if you use that definition. Because also, according to John Kerry's definition, you can't be a democracy and be an ethno-state at the same time. I mean, there are ways that borders and nations can position themselves in like organic ways, right? Where they have a majority of a population and they're still a democracy. But Israel's democracy is based on exclusion and occupation.
Israel is a racially gerrymandered ethno-state. And it's interesting that this UN guy is getting so much heat from, Zionists for saying this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Ben Shapiro went after this guy, calling him trash, and saying that UN is a flaming garbage heap. And the truth about the UN with regards to Israel is it was the original proponent of the racial gerrymander preferential to Zionism in 47. And Arabs and Palestinians from that point were like, yeah, this doesn't really work for us.
The United Nations is tilted towards Western
that's the real problem with the United Nations is when it wants to actually do something righteous, it's not allowed to. And when it's allowed to sign off on some imperial project, oftentimes it's able to. And that's overbroad, but like when the UN does actually get on its righteous stuff, it doesn't. It's just sad that it's not more powerful in potent in terms of enforcing that sort of thing. And in part that's because of America doesn't want it to be. Yeah.
I mean, we covered it a few days ago that the United States vetoed the call for a ceasefire. The Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, called on Guterres to resign after that speech, said that he expressed a, quote, understanding for terrorism and murder. He also said in response that Israel will block visas to UN officials. By the way, United Nations peace officials, I believe, have died in Gaza if you don't mind looking that up. That's what he said? Okay, just confirming that. It's all this information is getting muddled in my brain. But so it's just to add insult to injury, the government of Israel, after killing people who work for the United Nations, say, well, we also won't allow them into our country as well.
Kill them and fire them.
Yeah. Good. I mean, continue. I hope the Israeli government continues to show its face on this. Continue to call Amnesty International anti-Semitic or loving Hamas. Human Rights Watch anti-Semitic or loving Hamas. The United Nations anti-Semitic or loving Hamas.
Greta Thunberg.
Jewish Voice for Peace. If not now, I mean, they're not addressing those U.S. groups, but you understand what I'm saying. The WHO says, this was buried in the second to final paragraph of the Times article today, that they've documented 72 attacks on healthcare facilities in Gaza since this started. Putting aside this new evidence that the Times forensic team has found, that the published evidence from the U.S. and Israel on who bombed that hospital has been basically proven, or at least by the New York Times' forensic analysis, to be faulty evidence. We still don't have definitive proof of who did it, but that the evidence presented to the public by the Israeli government and then subsequently the U.S. was of, according to this forensics investigation, and the Times has very high standards, was a video of an Israeli rocket that didn't hit the hospital. And then they said it was a Hamas rocket. This is the kind of thing that we're up against. Constant piles of propaganda that we have to just, brick by brick, continue to disassemble. And the more people that speak out about this, the more untenable that torrent of lies are. So,
a rabid murder state that we are continuing to support unreservedly. I guess there's behind the scenes Biden that
sure.
I'll wait for the fruit from that tree.